I have a project here that I'm going to share with you. It's how to replace a shower faucet. This faucet is in the basement, so I'm going to replace it with a new Delta. My name's How To Bob. We're going to get started here by taking out the valve body. So I open my new box here. This is a Delta, and I'm going to take off all the non-essential items like the packing here and then the plastic casing over top of it. Just take the clips off here, and then I'm going to take the ring off of the valve body, leaving just the valve body, and I'll explain why in just a moment here once we get started. Now this faucet is designed for a shower only. You can see it only has 3 different holes in it, so it essentially installs the same way as a tub, and you got to have the right side up. So the first thing I'm going to do here is shut off the water main to the house. Here is what my old stuff looks like, and you can see it's pretty old, doesn't shut off correctly. So once I get that water shut off, I'm going to go to the nearest faucet that's the lowest one in the house, and that is the laundry tub here, and you can see it is draining all the water out. I need all the water out, and you can see this is up, so here's where my faucet's going to land, right there. Now you can use a female coupling on this, and you screw that in, and then you can take your fitting and solder it into your female fitting, but that gives you an extra piece that could leak. So what I'm going to do is just use my fitting and mount it in here and solder it into place. First step before I get soldering here is to clean all the fittings inside and out, and I have a wire brush here that I use to get the inside of the fittings, and I want to do that on all of them. It's a very important step to make sure that your solder sticks good. So just rub that around in there, all my fittings, and I can use my brush on the Street 90s that I'm going to use to solder into my valve body here. I just want to make sure I clean them. You can also use some emery paper for the outside if you prefer that. It works just as well either way. Okay, once I've got both sides of all my fittings cleaned thoroughly, I'm going to get some soldering flux, and I just want to dab my brush around in there, and I want to coat the surface of all of the fittings that I'm going to solder. Make sure I get enough flux in all the fittings on every piece, and then I can go ahead and start putting stuff together here. Let me get all the fittings coated, and then I want to put my piece together here. I want to make sure that it's facing straight up so I can adjust it so that it's perfectly straight up. Now I'm going to use MAP gas. MAP gas gets a little hotter than propane, and I found it a little bit easier to use. And I'm going to heat up the valve body, and this is why I said I was taking off all the plastic and the anything that's inside. You want to make sure if your faucet comes with a stem that's inside, you take the stem out first. And once I get this hot enough, the solder will flow without the torch. So I just go around the joint and I put the heat on the valve body, and it draws the solder back into the joint when you sweat it in there. So now I can go to my other side here, and I'm going to heat that up. And once that gets hot enough, I'll just run around the joint with the solder, and it will draw the solder back up into the joint and give me a nice tight seal. When I'm doing this, I want to make sure I go around the whole joint with the solder so that it has an opportunity to work its way in. Now I've got all the soldering done. I can go ahead and cool off my valve body because I have to, next to my shower riser coming off the top of this valve body. So I've got that cut, and again I'm going to take my cleaner here and just clean off both ends because I'm going to have to solder on both ends. And again on this, if you prefer, you can use emery paper, sandpaper, or whatever to clean off the outside of the pipe. Sometimes it's easier to use your emery paper on the outside. Once I got it good and clean, I'm going to come back with my flux and coat the whole outside of the pipe here. I've already coated the inside of my valve body, so I'm going to go ahead and stick that in my valve body now and work it all the way down. Now that I've got it in there, I can get my MAP gas and my solder and heat up the joint to be soldered. And I like to put the heat on the valve body, partially because the valve body is bigger, it takes more heat, and also it draws the solder into the joint by having the heat on the outer part or the female part. So once I get it hot enough, and I have to apply heat on and off to keep it at the temperature to melt my solder. I don't want a cold solder joint and cause leaks. Then I can wipe off my joint here with my wet rag. Just kind of keeps it clean, gives us a nice smooth finish, and I'll keep that cool so I don't get burnt when I'm handling the valve. And then I can use my drop ear. This is called a drop ear, and what it does is mounts to a board behind the wall, and that's for your shower arm. So it goes on the other end here, and I want to make sure I've got this good and clean. But I want to make sure that my fitting is in line with the shower valve body. You can see I've got to coat this with some flux here and coat my fitting. Then I'm going to put my fitting on, and this is where I need to make sure that it is in line with my valve body. As you can see, it's straight with the valve body right here. That way your shower arm's not coming out sideways out of the wall. So now I can go ahead and heat up the drop ear fitting. And if possible, I like to get the heat underneath. That way the heat flows up and around the fitting, and once I get it hot enough here, I keep testing with the solder, and once it gets hot enough, it should flow all the way around. I put a little hook in my solder, that way I can get around the backside and just run my solder all the way around the fitting, and it sucks the solder into the joint. Okay, now you can see here, this is where my new shower is going to go. So it's now time to remove the old one. Now the centerpiece here is made out of galvanized pipe, so I'm going to go ahead and just cut that out of the way with my reciprocating saw. And you can see here, this is a real thick wall, thick galvanized pipe that somebody just bent. That'll just make it easier for me to get my pipe cutters, my tubing cutters in here to cut off the other two pipes, which are copper. So I've got two different pipe cutters that I use. One has the cutting wheel on the top and one has the cutting wheel on the bottom. And what that does is allow me to get in some tighter spots where one won't fit, the other one will fit. Or I could use a small tubing cutter, but those sometimes are a little tricky to use. So I like using the little bit larger ones, and having two of them sure doesn't hurt. So once I get that cut with one, I'll just go around it with the other tubing cutter here and just slightly tighten it until it goes all the way through. And I've got my one side cut, so I'm going to start with this one. And I want to keep these two pipes cut close to the same length so that my valve body will be straight. Now I do have some flexibility in the sealing, so I can adjust that in a little bit here. Let me try this tubing cutter, and it looks like it goes all the way around, so I'll be able to finish up with this tubing cutter. Just go around and around, and you can see that there's paint. Somebody's went and painted these pipes, which is not a problem. So there's my valve body, my old one. So what I'm going to do now is take my torch and heat up the paint just a little bit. Once I get it kind of heated up, loosens it up, I can take my pipe cleaner and run it around the pipe just to get me cleaned up. Makes it a little bit easier with the torch, and since I have it handy, I might as well go ahead and use it. Okay, now that I've got both my pipes cleaned, I'm going to go ahead and flux both pipes. Make sure I get a good coating of flux on each pipe. Then I'm going to bring my valve over and make sure I got my fittings here coated with a good coat of flux. And I can put my valve on my pipes. You know, I want to make sure that I have them seated all the way up, and you can see that I have a 2x4 handy here. Once I get this seated all the way, I'm going to go ahead and push my 2x4 up there just to hold it in place. I'm going to take this wet rag, since I've got other fittings that I've already soldered. I want to wrap it around near those fittings so that when I'm heating up this spot here, I don't cause the other joints to loosen up or cause a leak. By having a wet rag around them, it'll keep the heat from loosening up those joints while I solder my other two joints here. So once I get that one soldered, I can go ahead and take the wet rag off and clean my joint off and inspect it for any leaks that I might have, and then I'll go ahead and wrap my rag around the other side just to protect, again, any of the joints that I've already soldered. I don't want those to heat up and cause leaks. Okay, once I get all the solder to flow all the way around, I can then take my rag and wipe off the area. Here we go. Let's take this off. Cool the valve body down, make sure that it's all the way cool, and then I'm going to come back in with some silicone grease here, and I have my valve stem, and I want to smear some silicone grease around all the O-rings. It makes it operate smoother, and it also makes it easier to put in my valve body. And you can see there's little tips on each side here, and it has to match up with the faucet, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in. The hot is on the left, and it's marked that way, so I go ahead and push it until it clips into place. You can feel it clip right there, and then I put my ring on. Next, I turn the water on, and that's how you install a shower faucet. I'm How To Bob. Thanks for watching.